The Denver Broncos snag a playmaker at wide receiver, and our latest mock draft Monday to pair alongside Bo Nix as he goes into year number 2. We'll tell you why this benefits the Broncos offense in a big way on today's episode. Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you know it is your team every day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, more every single day. All year long. Broncos Country, this is the place to be. A special shout out to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thank you so much for tuning in, making us your first listen, however you choose to do so. And if you're not yet an everydayer, become one. It's super simple. All you got to do is hit that follow or that subscribe button wherever you get your podcast, and you're going to stay up to date on everything happening with your favorite team. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. You can check out my written work over there, milehighsports.com. I'm joined as always by my good friend, obviously co-host Sayre Bedinger, the longtime site expert over there at predominantlyorange.com, where you can check out his written work on the daily here. And look, Broncos Country, you know what it is. It's Monday. That means Mock Draft Monday is here. And the Broncos, they focused all on offense in our latest 3-round mock draft that we did over there using Pro Football Network's mock draft simulator. We're going to break it all down here today. We're going to talk about why we didn't take a defensive position in the first 3 rounds of this year's upcoming draft. We'll also talk about why the Broncos found a nice little running back, a little sweet spot in there in round number 2. But we're going to kick things off by talking about the Broncos snagging a playmaker here in round 1, giving Bo Nix a weapon at wide receiver that can transform the Broncos offense in 2025. You can get all that here on today's episode show. So, Sayre, let's kick it off. Obviously, Mock Draft Monday. We've been very big on the Emeka Egbuka train here for the Broncos, but in the sense of giving some difference, giving Broncos Country some different options here. We went with the wide receiver out of the University of Missouri, my alumni there, right? Luther Burden III, wearing orange and blue in our latest mock draft. Let's talk about it.
Well, Cody, it seems like whether we're talking about the John Elway regime or the George Payton regime, the Broncos have had a pretty significant, representation at Missouri in terms of their scouting department going there and feeling really good because last year, remember, they took Chris Abrams-Drain out of Missouri as well, and getting hands-on scouting from last year. I think the Broncos will have liked Luther Burden, the wide receiver, for a long, long time, especially if you look back at his 2023 game tape, Cody. I feel like he would have been a clear top 10 draft pick if he had been in last year's draft. Now, this year, different story. Shaky quarterback play, battling through some inconsistencies on the big stage. That was tough for Luther Burden this year, but the traits are still there. Former 5-star prospect. Interesting factoid that I found out about Luther Burden, Cody. He's one of 10 children and he has 9 sisters. That's crazy to me. But look, if you can survive that, you could survive anything. I had no sisters. I had only brothers. But look, from people that I know who had all sisters, it's a tough game to play. So, but in all seriousness, Luther Burden, he has all those traits that you look for at the wide receiver position, right? He's got strong, soft hands. He can get open in a variety of different ways. He's a playmaker after the catch, and he's dominant at the catch point. Why is he not being considered a top tier wide receiver in this draft? I think it's largely due to the inconsistent production this past season, Cody. And I feel like a lot of Broncos Country really likes his potential fit there with that 20th overall pick. And our good friend Mike Kliss, he just reported over the weekend that the Broncos had Luther Burden in for a top 30 visit.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing. We're always in the timeline, right? When the draft comes around, you always see player comps, right? And a lot of people are comping a guy like Luther Burden and like Deebo Samuel in a sense. And I think when you look at it in this context, okay, Luther Burden, he's 5'11", so he's 1 inch taller than me at this point, but he's 205 pounds, right? And when you look at the Broncos roster as we know, Sean Payton, his kind of preference is sizable wide receivers, but you can't just have size. You have to have some speed. That's why they also have a guy like Marvin Mims, who is also 5'11" like Luther Burden, but he's 177 pounds. So there's a weight differential there, and obviously like a bulk and muscle mass differential. Marvin Mims' game is speed, where I think Luther Burden's speed is more so dominating, as you mentioned, after the catch. He can go out there and make a play through contact. Like, the thing I like about Luther Burden, he's a competitive guy. And one thing I asked Chris Abrams-Drain obviously throughout the season last year, staying on top of what's going on with Mizzou. He says, one thing about Luther Burden, the guy is ultra competitive. He's one of the toughest guys to cover because he doesn't really showcase anything in his release or pre-snap that gives an indication as to what type of route he's running. But he's also the type of guy that loves to be able to finish through contact and also can make some guys miss here or there. He doesn't have blazing speed by any means, but he's also a guy that can hurt opposing defenses across the middle of the field, which, to be honest with you, that seems like an area Sean Payton wants the Broncos, their offensive production, to be better at attacking the middle of the field out of two high shell looks that we're now seeing from NFL defenses across the board. You get a guy like Evan Ingram, that's great. Now, my question here to you, Sayre, in terms of how he can make the Broncos offense better, especially for Bo Nix going into year number 2, in what ways, considering we know Cortland Sutton is wide receiver 1 here, considering they love Marvin Mims, Devon Bailey, Troy Franklin, but Evan Ingram's going to have a big role. How does he have an impact in some of the key areas like third down or even in the red zone?
Well, he's a chain mover. I mean, you watch him play and he works well from the slot. He works well on the outside. I think, to me, he's ideally going to be lining up in the slot at the next level, Cody, where his physicality and sort of ball dominance really comes through. Obviously, just watch a handful of games over the course of this year's NFL draft prep and things like that. But where Luther Burden, to me, shines is the versatility of skill set within that slot spots that he could play. And it's not like he's not Lad McConkey in that he's just like got these, shifty moves out there where he can break ankles and get open really quickly. What he does is gets open in such a variety of different ways that it keeps defenders on their heels every time he's trying to get a release. And so what I really love about him is that ability to be that, what Sean Payton said with that triangle you were referencing, where you have the tight end, you have a running back who can catch passes, and then you have a third wide receiver or the guy that's playing in the slot who can affect the middle of the field. He's going to make those tough plays. He wants to make those tough plays. He wants to get the ball in traffic, and he wants to break tackles after, he's made the tough catch. So that, to me, is where I think that you get to overthinking guys a lot in the NFL draft process, to where you convince yourself, I see enough people are saying he's not a first round pick anymore. So is he really a first round pick, or can you get him in the second? I think Luther Burden has been a first round guy for the majority of this process. And yeah, you got to listen to maybe what the majority of teams are doing, but it only takes one to make a guy a first round pick. And I think for the Denver Broncos, he's kind of exactly what they need, in that same vein of Emeka Egbuka, as being able to play in the slot and outside.
Well, I think it's a lot of how you use a guy as well. I mean, in Missouri last year, you touched on it. Luther Burden's numbers from a production standpoint, they dipped over the course of 12 games. He had 61 catches for 676 yards. That equates to around 11.1 yards per reception. He still had 6 touchdowns on the year, but they also used him in some ways, some jet motion. They got him the ball out there in space, right? He had 9 rushing attempts for 115 yards and 2 touchdowns last season in that role. But yeah, we're also at a very critical juncture here when you look at trying to figure out what you need for your team. It's like, okay, what does the data tell us? Well, 2024, if you look at just strictly the box score, right? You look at his stats, it doesn't tell the full picture. As you mentioned, quarterback ups and downs, offensive ups and downs. I mean, there was one game I watched in Missouri last year where their offense had a couple of big plays and then they got hosed. They got, I think one of the things was, I think Luther Burden in one game got called for a really bad offensive pass interference call that was not that, and it got pulled back. And then I think they had a turnover on one of the next plays. I think he scored on that play initially. They called it back there. But I mean, this is a guy that's like, okay, what do we trust in our evaluation? Are you bringing him in to be wide receiver 1? No, you're not. Like right now with the Broncos and our line of thinking of them going and taking a wide receiver like a Burden or like an Emeka Egbuka in round number 1, it's not to be wide receiver 1. It's to be that wide receiver 2. Now, the difference between Egbuka and obviously a guy like Luther Burden was the featured guy primarily at Missouri, whereas Egbuka wasn't necessarily the featured guy. He was a role player. He played like a wide receiver 2 role there amongst a handful of really good wide receivers, and he still produced at a high level. So he's already accustomed to that role, whereas I think you see some of the draft critiques, and I don't know how much validity there is to this because this is smokescreen season, right? You see some bad information getting put out there to potentially tank a prospect's draft, where he may stand in terms of how teams view him. A lot of people said, he's got diva traits to him. And he's got if he's not getting the football, he makes it very well known. And some people say he's extraordinary on Saturday, but he's ordinary on Monday through Friday. How much of this is true? I don't think we'll ever know, but that's why Sean Payton, that's why the coaching staff at the Combine, they sit down and they interview these guys. They bring them in for a visit. They have a chance to meet even further on that. I'm very curious to see what kind of gets brought out of that. But I'm all aboard the Broncos taking a wide receiver in this year's NFL draft. That's where we went in round number 1 of our mock draft in Broncos Country. We want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Luther Burden wearing an orange and blue jersey? The Broncos tapping into that Mizzou pipeline here once again. Is there another pick that maybe you would have made in round 1? Make sure you let us know here. But we're not done, Broncos Country. The offense was the theme here of Mock Draft Monday, and the Broncos, they got a running back that has a wide variety of tools in his arsenal that could help the Broncos offense be efficient on third down and also in the red zone. We'll highlight that pick and much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at TurboTax. And Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now, Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day.
Yeah, it's an expert who will find you every deduction possible and every file form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. So you can get all the money that you need back guaranteed. And there's no waiting, no wondering, no worries. And this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com.
Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees.
We know the Denver Broncos are going to be getting a running back in the 2025 NFL draft, but where and when? Who's it going to be? There's a lot of backs in this class. Could it be in the second round like we've got in our mock draft today? Well, Broncos Country, there's lots of options, and you're going to want to be subscribed to Locked On Broncos if you're not already, because we're going to be breaking down every selection in the 2025 NFL draft, which is just over 2 weeks away at this point. And I think we can all agree that the Broncos, they need a running back maybe more than anything in this draft. And whoever they select is going to be a fascinating pick because of that fact, Cody, because of the fact that they need a running back so desperately. Whoever they emerge from this draft class is, we're going to know how highly this team thinks of that particular prospect. And so with that, I want to throw it to you. The second round pick for the Denver Broncos here in this mock draft. We got them taking our running back out of we took Mizzou in round 1 to honor your alma mater. I did not go to Iowa, Cody, but we got us a Hawkeye here in round 2.
I know you love your Hawkeyes, man. So we're going obviously with Kaleb Johnson, running back out of Iowa. Make sure you check out Locked On Hawkeyes. We'll get some insight from some of our draft experts and obviously our college experts who cover the teams here on the Locked On Podcast Network as the build-up for the draft continues to happen here in obviously in the next couple of weeks. It's going to be a fun time here. But, for Kaleb Johnson, I mean, Sayre, it's interesting when you talk about running back, because I think a lot of people are wondering what type of back are the Broncos looking for? And it has been reported out there, and George Payton has said this. He's told our good friend Mike Kliss this, obviously at an interview, a sit down at the Combine, that they want to find a 3-down back. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the Broncos are going to go into this year's draft and say, if this guy's a 3-down back, we're going to draft him. Ideally, they would love to find a guy but I think a lot of people are missing out on the fact that the Broncos have stated that they really love the 4 running backs they have on their team right now. And I can tell you this with 100% certainty, that inside that building, Sean Payton, the Broncos, they're hopeful that Audric Estime can emerge and be that favorite to be that 3rd-down back, and then everything else opens up. I think there's going to be a lot of competition at this position. We know they're going to take a back in the draft. So for us in round number 2, taking Kaleb Johnson, very interesting, Sayre, because, he's a little bit taller than your standard back, but man, this is a guy who's got explosive traits. You watched a ton of Iowa games, and obviously Iowa, they're well known for their defense, but Kaleb Johnson, he was their offense for the Hawkeyes for the last, I would say, what was it? The last 12 games that they played, and even a little bit down the stretch here a couple of years ago when he really started to emerge. How did he go from obviously his freshman year where only had 700-something yards, coming in there? He had a step back the next year, his sophomore year, but then in year number 3 last year as a senior, 1,500 yards, and I'd say overall a handful of touches and production offensively per game for him, not only just as a rusher, but also as a receiver.
Yeah, if not for Ashton Genty this past year, we would have been talking about Kaleb Johnson as having arguably the best year of any running back in college football. He was just outstanding. And I think it's a mentality shift for those running backs at Iowa when you become the featured guy, right? Because if you're a running back committing to the Hawkeyes, you're going to get action back there. You're going to get handed the ball because they don't throw well at all. And that also means that if you're running back, you're not necessarily getting utilized out of the backfield properly in a consistent basis because there's no real threat to throw the ball downfield. And so teams are keying in every single week on a guy like Kaleb Johnson. I think that takes a mental toughness and fortitude for him to know that when you look at his yards per carry average, Cody, I think a lot of folks will immediately kind of write that off, even though it's still pretty good, but you'll write it off compared to certain guys who are averaging 6, 7, 8 yards a carry in this draft because, well, I mean, shoot, this guy must not be explosive. You look at the yards per carry average, it's not great. That's not the case. The situation here is that he's facing an 8-man box almost every single snap that he's playing out there, and he's still getting the ball and he's still being productive. He's still moving the chains, getting the ball into the end zone. So for my money, if you can get Kaleb Johnson in round 2 versus Travion Henderson in round 1, I think that's like those two scenarios are like the dreams, right? Especially if you can get like Travion in round 2 as well, Cody. But to me, if you can get either one of these guys at either juncture, and I wouldn't even be shocked. I heard somebody say today that the over-under, they asked an NFL personnel man for over-under 2.5 running backs in round 1 of the 2025 draft. That executive said they're smashing the over right now. So
Ooh.
I wouldn't be surprised if Kaleb Johnson enters that discussion at some point.
Well, I mean, obviously you saw an uptick in overall touches, 240 rushing attempts last season, 1,500 yards, 21 touchdowns. I mean, Sayre, like I said, he was the offense there for Iowa. 22 catches out of the backfield, $188, 2 touchdowns receiving there. Also has, in his history at Iowa in his 3 years there, has the ability to play the return option, which, I mean, right now kind of at least seems open. Part of me wonders here if the Broncos are looking to add one of those running backs, in some competition there. Like if Johnson is added, as we took him in this mock draft, if he's added to the mix there with guys like Blake Watson, Tyler Bidet, is there going to be a competition in training camp to see who maybe can return next to Marvin Mims this upcoming season as the kick return option? As we know, that has obviously led to some more opportunities maybe for Marvin to go off. But like if teams want to kick away from Marvin and they want to kick it to the other guy, you have to have another guy back there. So I'd be very curious to see how a guy like Kaleb Johnson fits in the mix here. You watched more Iowa games than I did. Pass protection obviously is a talking point that people are talking about when you're looking to replace what Javonte Williams did really well in the offense at the tailback position. How does he stand up here in pass protection?
I think he's good. I think he'll be able to be utilized in that way right away in the NFL. He's got that big body, 6 foot, 220. He looks like the quintessential like late 90s, early 2000s running back. I mean, I think I've mentioned before, he was made in a Shanahan Kubiak factory. Basically, he's got that size to him, and he's going to be able to stick his nose in there right away. Again, Iowa not throwing the ball a ton, but they play a pro style offense still. So, I mean, that's the caveat to all this is that, yes, they run the ball ad nauseum. They run the ball as much as about, Georgia Tech or whatever, running the triple option, but they don't run the triple option. They run a more pro style attack, very much in the old New England style of doing things. And so I think that'll translate well with what Sean Payton wants his guys to do. You have to know a lot of stuff to be able to play and start for Kirk Ferentz for a number of years. And so Kaleb Johnson earning that trust. And I think that that's a huge notch on his belt to be able to have been the face of that offense, even though it wasn't a great offense. For you to be able to produce like that in those circumstances is rather impressive. And so I think as a 3-down back, he has untapped potential, especially as a receiver. We saw against Nebraska, our good friend Cameron and I text back and forth every Nebraska-Iowa game because he's a big Nebraska guy. And I shut that game off because I'm like, I'm going to watch. I can't remember what show I was watching, but I'm like, I'm going to watch the show instead. And he's like texting me, Kaleb Johnson's not getting anything. They're not giving him anything, not giving him anything. All of a sudden, the dude busts out at the clip that's been circulating around the internet. And when it comes to his pass catching abilities, catches the ball on the right sideline, takes it upfield for like 80 yards or whatever it was. I mean, he's just explosive and has untapped potential there. So I think he's going to play a lot faster than he timed.
Yeah, they don't win that game if he doesn't have that, because obviously, Iowa hung on to that 13-10 over Nebraska. And you mentioned the ground game, 17 carries that game for 45 yards. Nebraska's defense was hell-bent on saying, hey, we're going to stop Kaleb Johnson. We're focusing our efforts on this, which is crazy. I mean, you mentioned the amount of stacked boxes that he's had. I'm looking at his game production log here. I mean, he had 4 games in a row to start the season of over 100+ yards. One of those games against Minnesota on the road, he had 21 carries for 206 yards in that game and 3 touchdowns there overall. And then his next best game there obviously came against Washington, where they won that one 40-16, 21 carries, $166 and 3 touchdowns in that game. This is a guy who I think can produce. And the NFL level, you're going to see 8-man boxes. You're going to see dynamic blitzes. He's got the physicality I think will thrive. And if the Broncos can find a way to get him into the scheme, I'm very curious to see how Sean Payton would plan to utilize him here. But Broncos Country, want to know your thoughts on us taking Kaleb Johnson in round 2 here on Mock Draft Monday here on Locked On Broncos. But coming up next, we're going to discuss the other offensive position that the Broncos take. We ignored defense. Defense is pretty rock solid for Denver, but we took a tight end out of Miami for Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. But what does this mean pairing him alongside a guy like Evan Ingram? We'll talk about that much more here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at Monarch Money. And Sayre, you ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I've done that all the time. Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track, especially as we're planning a wedding. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your own personal CFO, and it gives you full visibility and control over your finances. That's what me and my fiance have found beneficial for us as we plan our wedding this summer.
Well, and what I love about Monarch Money is that it's not just a budgeting app, right? It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, your investments, spending in one place. And so you stop just kind of managing your money and you start actually building some wealth.
And you also learn a lot of surprising insights inside of the app. And I tell you what, I came away very surprised understanding how often I would get takeout food or how much I would go to spend on a cup of coffee. That's what Monarch Money told me inside of their app. And so it's helped me and my fiance make some adjustments on some of our spending habits inside of the app.
And you could take control of your finances with Monarch Money. So just use the code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It's a great deal. That's monarchmoney.com and the code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
The fourth quarter action of today's episode, Locked On Broncos, is here, and we believe the value here for Denver in this year's NFL draft is really going to be their first 3 picks inside the top 100. Can you make the most hay there when you already have a strong defense and when you have offensive pieces already around Bo Nix that are thriving? You have an offensive line that's intact, but how can you make Bo Nix better? You go out there and you get him weapons. We've already taken a wide receiver who could be a playmaker in round number 1. We've taken a running back who's got the capability of being a 3-down back here for the Broncos, and Kaleb Johnson in round 2. Round number 3, Sayre, we went with the trend here of getting that triangle, as Sean Payton talks about, a tight end. Miami tight end Elijah Arroyo in round number 3. Your thoughts on obviously why we decided to go with this pick? There were several other tight end options available. I know there were Terrence Ferguson. He was an option there. Gunnar Helm was available. But we decided to go with this direction here of Arroyo. What traits does he bring to the table that pair well with Bo Nix, but also alongside Evan Ingram, who is signed to be the Joker here in free agency?
Well, I think first of all, you got to look at Sean Payton's history with Miami guys. I know you don't scout the helmet, obviously, but he had Jeremy Shockey back in the day when he was with the Giants and Saints. That worked out pretty well for him.
Mixtape Shockey.
The dude was unbelievable. The dude was ahead of his time. There's no question about it. He was awesome. So much fun to watch. Jimmy Graham, of course, with the New Orleans Saints as well, coming from Miami as well. So you can't help but wonder, does Sean Payton want to dip back into that talent pool again and see if he can strike gold for a third time? I don't know that there's necessarily anything to that, but it's an interesting potential, storyline to monitor. But when you talk about that triangle, you talk about the tight end position and its importance. We know Evan Ingram, he signed a 2-year deal, and that's not forever. And you want to make sure that you are equipped because, well, Evan Ingram has missed a lot of games, right? And if he misses any games this year, the Broncos don't really have anything beyond him to go out there and be that pass catching option. Yes, Lucas Kroll came back. Yes, you still have Adam Troutman and Nate Adkins, but nobody like Elijah Arroyo, who is extremely athletic. He finally got the chance this past year after dealing with knee injuries. His first 2 years at the U, finally got the chance to really blossom with Cam Ward. The potential, and probably not even potential anymore, Cody. Sounds like he's going to be the number 1 overall pick to the Titans. He really blossomed with him at the quarterback position, showing off after the catch abilities. Every time I would watch Cam Ward, because you always watch the intriguing guys for the draft, right? When it comes to quarterback, every time I turn on Cam Ward, I'm like, who the heck is number 8? Who the heck is this guy out there? I mean, Arroyo's good. He's got some chops, and I think he's just beginning to scratch the surface.
So would this be a little bit more of a risky pick for the Broncos, considering obviously the previous injury history? Like I said, he played in 12 games his freshman year, played in 5 games, obviously his sophomore year. He played in 6 games, kind of continuing on to another sophomore year there, a little bit of an asterisk on that, but obviously his senior year. I mean, he played in all 13 games, which is what you're hoping for, right? He's got good size at 6'4", 235 pounds. I imagine he'll probably be 235, maybe 225 for where the Broncos might play him along if this is obviously a selection error. But, I mean, you talk about it, 16.9 yards per catch. What was it that he necessarily brought to the table for that Miami offense that obviously had a playmaker at the quarterback position? It's going to, as you said, go number 1 overall. But they also had a handful of wide receivers that could also produce. So he was another guy that came out and played big here for them this past season.
100%. He's got that, dominant after the catch mentality, which I think becomes a theme for me when I'm looking at NFL draft guys, Cody, because we know that Sean Payton likes to get the ball out as quickly as possible. This is something that, hey, this guy, he catches the ball. He's got soft hands. He can do all those different things. But really, when it comes to making plays after the catch, I think that's where he really shined, in my opinion. And so it's not every single time he catches the ball, he's got that vertical field stretching ability as well. But you get the feel that he's not wanting to go down immediately. And so I really like that about his game. I feel like that translates to the next level. And I do think there's some inherent risk involved. And that's why you maybe get him here in round 3. You could also consider, Harold Fannin, who's, I believe, coming to Denver for a visit as well. He had a chat with Kay Adams, and she gave him the pointer like, hey, when you meet Sean Payton, have all football stuff in your backpack. I thought that was kind of funny. But so I like that. But I want to just quickly say with the defense stuff, like the Broncos have spent so much money on the defensive side of the ball that it really does make sense to go heavy offensively. That doesn't mean, hey, the right guy falls to you defensively on the defensive line or linebacker, whatever, go ahead and take them. But I don't think you necessarily need to force balance in this kind of draft because you've spent so much money already on the defensive side of the ball.
I think it's just trying to figure out, how do you balance it, right? Because eventually, you have one of the highest paid defenses in all of football. So now obviously your defense was one of the top units last year, but the offense has to catch up at some point, right? While you have that window of these guys who are on these big deals, we anticipate Nick Nito, Zach Allen, probably going to get some big deals here very soon for the Broncos. Could JFM be in that conversation? We've discussed that here on the show in the last week or so, but now this is where it's like, all right, hey, while you have one of the highest paid defenses that on paper, if they stay healthy, they're going to be very good. Can you take all these young pieces who are on rookie deals and maximize your offense and your production with Bo Nix, right? Because eventually you may lose some of your defensive guys. That may not be your strength anymore over time, but you're hoping that your young guys can develop to where your offense eventually becomes the team's strength. So that's the balance. That's the gamble that every NFL team has to play with. So I see the reasoning for that. And honestly, I think you and I are on the same board here. I think a lot of people in Broncos country are as well. I would not be upset if the Broncos took an offensive player with their first 4 picks in this year's NFL draft. Why not load up on the offense, an area that has to be better, that can be better, and that showcase signs of growing, but the defense has been your bread and butter, obviously, this last year. We expect them to be the dominant factor here once again. Now, can your offense catch up to that a little bit? I think that's the game the Broncos are trying to play here. Going back to Arroyo as well, he's played against some good competition. Their season opener against Florida, they won that one 41-17. He had 4 catches, 89 yards. Kind of interesting against Florida State. He didn't have a lot of production in the pass game. He had 2 catches for 24 yards, but he did have a 7-yard passing touchdown in that game. And then obviously they lost to Iowa State and obviously a bowl game 42-41. He had 4 catches, 64 yards. The overall statistics there don't showcase that. But when you watch the tape of him, his size is evident. His ability to box out smaller defenders is there. You don't need him to be a game-breaking guy that has this ridiculous speed, but you just need him. Can he be a possession guy for you? Can he be a consistent chain mover? That's where I think we have to analyze maybe what the Broncos could be looking for at the tight end position. So, Sayre, I think that this was a great mock draft, obviously here on Mock Draft Monday, but we're going to leave it up to our friends and family out there in Broncos country. Make sure you let us know your thoughts on our Mock Draft Monday. Next week's is going to be a big one as well because we're going to choose another Broncos fans mock draft. You get to submit it. We'll pick the best one, and we'll feature it here and share our thoughts on your mock draft here on Locked On Broncos. But with that said, Broncos country, that'll wrap up today's episode of the show. For you everydayers, tomorrow's episode, we're talking about one of the Broncos' most underrated defensive players that they have, who just signed an exclusive rights tender, Dondre Tillman. We did a film breakdown on him. We looked at it, and we said, you know what? This guy was better than we thought. We'll tell you exactly what he's going to bring to the table here for the Broncos defense in his second season in the NFL on tomorrow's episode, Locked On Broncos.